Hi, everyone. Welcome and thanks for attending. I'm Scott at Chief Architect, and we're here today to talk about 3D tours and virtual walkthroughs. So we've recently covered this topic in some detail, 3D walkthroughs, how to make great virtual tours. You can find a link to this on our website. We'll also chat that out in today's session. And today we're going to build upon those tools and that session that we did previously, and then we're going to show off some of our great new features we've introduced with the new version of Chief Architect coming early next year. You may notice my occasional assistant, Molly. She's what I call my street dog. My other dog is out at the vet this morning. And also on today's call are a number of Chief Architect staff members to keep an eye on me and also to help answer your questions. I'm happy to introduce Alex Parente. Alex is our lead developer responsible for the technology that you're about to see on today's webinar and will be available for your questions.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, it was a lot of fun working on the walkthroughs for this version. We worked hard to make sure we got it as positive experience for you guys as possible. We added a lot more visual feedback and responsiveness when you're working on your walkthroughs, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what everyone thinks and seeing how you all use it.
Well, great, Alex. We look forward to your interaction here. We have pre-recorded some remarks on the technology, and we're going to go through and play this video. During that time, you can chat your questions in, and our staff here will be happy to answer those. And then at the conclusion of today's prepared remarks, we're going to open up for live questions. You can find both the chat option and when you're ready to ask your questions at the end of the session, just raise your hand. You'll find those controls in your GoToWebinar control panel. And then we'll be recording this session and then sending out a link to you with a survey. And we'd appreciate your feedback. It really helps us in preparing for the next session and setting it up. So with that, we're going to switch over here and let's get started with the presentation.
In this 3D walkthrough seminar, I'm going to build upon another seminar, How to Make Great Virtual Tours, that provides a good foundation for creating walkthroughs. I'm also going to preview our upcoming 3D walkthrough tools that will be coming in version X13, scheduled to be released in early 2021. For our Chief Challenge, I would encourage you to watch our previous walkthrough video, create your own virtual tour for your current project, and then post your results on social media using the hashtag Chief Challenge. I would encourage you to follow these steps and tips to help in your learning. In this session, I'm going to cover the basics of creating a walkthrough, tips for creating your virtual tours, and then preview several new features we have coming in version X13. You can find a number of virtual tours on our website as examples of what you can create using Chief Architect. As I scroll down our page on the NKBA section, you'll see several virtual tours. This large bathroom tour was recorded using the physically based rendering camera style, as were most of the videos in this section of the page. Let's go into the program and take a look at how to create a 3D walkthrough path and the tips for creating 3D walkthroughs. For this seminar, I have opened up one of our sample plans, the Bachelor View Kitchen. I'm going to use this to create our 3D walkthrough. I'm going to begin the process for the seminar with the basics of creating a walkthrough path. You're going to find this tool underneath your 3D menu down here underneath Walkthroughs. To create a simple walkthrough path in front of the house, I'm going to right click, drag, and release. Then I'm going to go in, press the space bar to be out of the selection mode. I'm going to click on one of the keyframes. Let's go ahead and zoom in here so we can see what we're talking about. Click on the keyframe. I'm going to rotate it so that it's looking toward the house on the first keyframe. I'm also going to click on the second keyframe and again point it towards the direction of the house. Then for the walkthrough path, I'm going to come over, I'm going to open up the information for the walkthrough path. You'll find this in the lower left-hand corner of my screen, open. In this walkthrough path specification panel, you'll see the two frames that I have. For each of these frames, you can specify the speed, and I'm going to go ahead and increase this. This is an exterior walkthrough. It's a straight path. I'm going to use 5 feet per second. The camera angle, which is the degree which I rotated the camera. The tilt angle, I'm going to go ahead and tilt this down minus 20 degrees. And then for the height, I'm going to go ahead and increase that to 12 feet. Since this camera is on the exterior of the house and I may or may not have a terrain, I am going to use the camera height to be absolute, which is a function of whatever 0 is in your subfloor, and it won't jump around or follow the terrain. Then I'm going to go back up to keyframe number 2, do similar information. Now notice that the speed after the camera is grayed out since this is the last keyframe. The camera angle, again, that's the rotation of the camera looking toward the house. Tilt angle, I'm going to tilt this down, and I'm also going to set the height at 12 feet. You can see based on the information that the walkthrough will be about 7.5 seconds, and now I've created my first walkthrough path and would be ready to record it. Now before I record it, let's go through and talk about some of the tips for your 3D walkthroughs. The first thing that I like to do, these are optional things, I like to set a north pointer, and I also like to set a sun angle. That way when I record the walkthrough it will look more realistic. To create the north pointer and a sun angle, which I have already done over here in the plan, you'll find these tools. The north pointer tool and the sun angle tool will be underneath your line tool. Over here on the left hand side of my screen is the north pointer. You just simply click and drag to generate the north pointer. I'm going to hit escape since I already have one created. The next thing is to create a sun shadow line. You can see that I have one generated. If I zoom in, you can see that this is actually set up to be 10 a.m. on July 4th. I typically like to have maybe 4 sun angles, one in the morning and evening for both the summer and winter times of year. Again, you'll find this tool underneath your line tool. Over on the left hand side, you'll find the sun angle. I'm going to click on this tool. I'm going to come over and just click. The sun angle information will pull out your latitude and longitude. You can change these settings as a default in your preferences. My latitude and longitude are set, and then you can set the time and date for each of the settings in here. I'm going to go in and set this to December 21st, and then the time of day I'm also going to use 11 a.m. I'll go ahead and click Make Shadow, generate the new shadow, and then if we kind of zoom out just a little bit, we can take this larger shadow. I will double click to change the fill style so you can see the difference in here, and I'm just going to use one of these lighter colors, and you can superimpose and see the difference of the shadow that's in the winter versus the shadow that is in the summer. Now the next tip that I have in creating 3D walkthroughs is to define the layer set and your lighting for your walkthrough. Now with the sun angle, that's part of your lighting. Let's go through and set that first. I'm going to come up into my default settings. Underneath the 3D view defaults, I'm going to come down to sunlight. And then you can see for the sunlight defaults, I want to use the new sun angle that I just generated. And now I currently have 2. I'm going to use the one that we set for December. That will be the default that I will use when generating this 3D walkthrough. The next thing I'm going to do is when you record your 3D walkthrough in X12, the default settings for your cameras is set in your full camera information. So let's go in and edit this. On the camera panel, the first section, General, about the camera rendering techniques, you can actually define this inside the Record panel in the walkthrough path of the default setting. The lighting information is important. Here's where you can set the maximum number of lights. Currently it is set to 8. That's very acceptable for the exterior. However, if you're doing the interior, you may want to increase that, or you may also want to define a light set, which can be a grouping of lights by room. You can see a few that I already have. In this case, for the kitchen and living room walkthrough path that I have, I created a light set with all the lights on inside of that light set. I'm going to leave my lighting set with the minimum number of lights. The next things that are important is to control which layer set you want to use when you're recording your walkthrough path. You'll find this setting underneath the selected defaults. Currently, this camera will use a layer set that I built that's a 3D camera without landscape. Of course, you can choose if you just are using the 3D view camera and you want to create it with landscape or without. You can define exactly which layer set to use when you're recording it. Then, when you're recording with a backdrop, you'll find that setting underneath the backdrop panel. If you want to include one, select your backdrop, browse out, and go ahead and set that. I'm going to leave mine blank for the time being. All of my default settings are set, and now I'm going to come down, click on the recording path, and then use the tool in the lower edit menu to record the walkthrough along the path. As we walk through this dialog, at the top of the setting is the quality. Typically the compression, if you want to set it at 100% or 0%, it will range. If you're just doing a test, you may want to have a higher compression. Frames per second, remember, as I'm doing a test in X12, the frames per second I want to set to a very low number so it will go very quickly when I do this test record to verify that I have it in the right position for the camera angles and tilt. Resolution, typically my recommendation for your resolution is either to use the 1280 by 720, higher resolution, which is typical high definition, 1920 by 1080. Of course, there are other settings, as well as you can do custom sizes and specify that. For your rendering technique, this controls the style of camera. You can choose the different rendering techniques to record your walkthroughs in. I'm going to use the standard camera, and then you can turn your shadows on. Again, I'm using a test record. My recommendation is no shadows when you're doing your test record. Of course, that switches beginning in X13 because we can actually preview the walkthrough before we do any test recording. A few other settings for bloom, hide camera facing exterior walls, and then video codec. I'm shooting this video on a Windows computer. This video codec that is the default for Windows is good. Also, typically I use a Mac. The default video codec that shows up in there is typically also very good. At this point, I have all of the parameters set. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. The program will then prompt you to save your camera, and I'm going to come in here, pick a location, and go ahead and type in the file name. The program then goes through, generates the view. Again, that's going at 5 frames per second, so it's very herky-jerky. If I open up that video and play it back, you can see that we're trying to verify that we have our lighting and our tilt angle appropriate. Once you've determined that, then you can go back in, use your record options, and make the suggested settings. You may want to turn on your shadows. You may want to use raycasted, that's going to give you a little bit more realistic, and also change your frames per second. My recommendation is at 30 frames per second. I'll go ahead and step on the previous version of this, click Save. And as this goes through and generates the rendering, you're going to notice that it's going much slower at 30 frames per second. I'll go ahead and skip through until it's completed, and then we'll play that video. Now, as I open up the completed video, you're going to see it's much smoother at 30 frames per second. We also have shadows on, and now I'm happy with the recording of that. Now, a few more things about 3D walkthroughs. Again, I would encourage you to watch the previous video that we have done on how to make great virtual tours. One of the tips, you can see that I have a walkthrough path in the center, and a few other tips that I just put out there is when you have a sharp angle, if you're going to turn, go around a corner, or go around the kitchen island, be very slow when you're setting your feet per second. My suggestion is maybe a 1/4 foot per second. Typically people might walk at 4 feet per second. That allows you to be slower. Also use smaller walkthrough paths. If you have an entire house, maybe just do small sections of the walkthrough. You can always put these together. On a Mac, they use iMovie, and on a PC you can use the built-in Microsoft Video Editor, and you could drop in 3 or 4 walkthrough paths and then stitch those together, speed them up as you feel that you need to optimize those walkthroughs. The 3D walkthrough tools are receiving a substantial update in X13, which was used to generate this specific virtual tour. Let me switch over and let's take a look at the new improvements that have been made. For Chief Architect X13, one of the things you're going to notice about the new walkthrough tool, when you click on a walkthrough path, we have a new feature that will allow you to preview the walkthrough path. In the new preview panel, you'll be able to see an exact preview of the camera. You can use the slider tool that we have and slide through and then see a preview of the entire section of the walkthrough. For each keyframe, in this case I only have 2 keyframes, you can use the tool to orbit in the keyframe itself. To make that adjustment, you can come in here and adjust the camera using your orbit tool just like you would do in a 3D camera view. This makes editing and setting your view up a much easier process and takes out a lot of the guesswork. The next thing that we have done is you come down, you can open up and create a 3D view. If you want to capture this image, let's go ahead and click this Create 3D Camera View from the preview frame. You can see that it generates the 3D view. You can export this image. It's a great way to be able to save out a 3D camera. When you're ready to begin recording your walkthrough, we've moved a lot of the settings that were previously in other dialogues and default settings directly through the record options. In your camera options, you can come in here, you can define the camera style if you're going to have shadows, if you're going to have a watermark, reflections, and other settings that we've already reviewed in X12 that were in different areas of the program and make the process easier when you're setting up backdrops or your camera settings. You're going to notice that the resolution setting is in here, the compression, the duration, frames per second. Your video codec is all available directly through this interface. The other thing you can do when recording is we can come in here and we can slide the start and end frame and record just a smaller segment right in between these two areas and create a smaller targeted recording visually that we've adjusted using the start and end points. You can set the properties for your recording using the Define button. You can come over, specify exactly the information for all of your keyframes. On the camera panel, notice that I do have shadows and reflections turned on. We'll be able to preview that using this button here in just a minute. Set the backdrop, and all of these things can be previewed through your panel. And when I use this button to toggle on those preview settings, it may be difficult to see in this small preview, but I can see the shadow as well as the backdrop information. And this is a helpful thing, again, in helping me understand exactly the way the 3D walkthrough will look when I do the recording, saving me the step of doing a test recording. When you use this preview panel, it will take more time to generate since it's actually going through and rendering that scene. You can see that I've turned it off. Now you're going to find a few more buttons inside of the control. You can move between the different keyframes, move to previous, move to the next frame. Again, you can skip to the next frame just by simply clicking on it. The button for jump to the next keyframe, keyframe number 2, that will move us as far as the slider is. If we slide that all the way to the end, we jump to the end of the keyframe. You can use that and then return to the beginning. We'll move the start. The next button we've added is the play button, which will step through your walkthrough, give you a preview. This saves you the step of doing a test recording. You can get all the direct feedback right here before you actually click the record button. The next button, of course, is the record button. This will open up, and again, we've covered most of these settings. Allows you to set your resolution and other information for the recording. Well, I hope you're as excited about these new walkthrough tools as we are at Chief Architect. Our goal was to give you more 3D visualization, interaction, and feedback to help you create your walkthroughs. There are more features to come in the walkthrough tools that I've yet to show. Please stay tuned as we release X13 in early 2021.
Some great new features coming in X13. We're super excited about it. And so with that, we want to take your questions live here. And if you would like to ask any questions, please use your raise hand feature in the GoToWebinar control panel. Raise your hand. And as you do that, make sure you unmute your microphone and we'll take your question live. Carrie, would you take a look out there, see if we have any questions from the audience.
Yes, we have a question from initials MB. Go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
So I have a question about VR. And that question is, will walkthroughs in some way, shape, or form eventually with Chief Architect be available in VR headsets like Oculus? I know it all depends on, you know, the model being built, but has that been talked about internally at Chief Architect? And is that potentially a feature that might be coming in the future, or maybe it's available now and I'm missing it, but I'm fairly new.
Yeah. Great question. What was your name again?
My name is Matt.
Matt. Okay.
Yeah, I work for Facebook and I work with Oculus, and I'm very into VR and AR, and so I see incredible potential with Chief Architect with virtual reality. So
Okay, great.
Thanks for the question.
Yeah, Alex, you wanna take a run at that?
Well, my first thought was we can do something like what you're describing. I wouldn't say that it's with the specific walkthrough tools, but we do have VR features where you're able to move around through the virtual space. I know I built a small structure recently, and I was able to use our VR tools to move around through the space digitally within Chief Architect, you know, before we even put the first stud up. And so it was very, very neat to be able to do that and then see it come alive. So I wouldn't say, I don't know that how we'd incorporate VR specifically with our walkthrough tools, as the walkthrough is really a way to create a video, and VR is a totally separate type of experience where you're not constrained to a path. But in terms of walking through VR, we do have that. You're able to walk through a space with your VR headset.
Okay. All right. I'm pretty new to it, so thank you for explaining that.
Thanks, Matt. Carrie?
Scott and Alex, we have a question from Sal Houdin. Go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, thank you very much. I am calling from Pakistan. I have been using this software since long. And I have a question, how to control the jerks in the walkthrough.
Okay, so a couple of things, if I just kind of zoom in here on my screen here for some tips. And one of the things that you're going to want to make sure that you do, one is where you have sharp angles. Make sure you slow your keyframes down to about, my suggestion is 0.25 feet per second. If I kind of zoom into the kitchen area that we have, you're going to see that I have a few pretty significant rotations, maybe between camera 4 and camera 5. So that's a lot of rotation moving in that direction. And if you look at the keyframe settings in here for this, we just come over here and look at keyframe setting number 4, you're going to notice that the speed after that, I've actually slowed it down to 1 foot per second. It's always easy to keep it very slow when you do your rotation. And then the other thing, Sal, that is recommended is when you do your recording, on my tips here, I have the recording at 30 frames per second. I believe we support up to 60 frames per second, and some of the folks internal to our company here that produce a lot of these videos actually recommend going at 60 frames per second. So you're going to get twice the amount of frames in that duration. And with those two things, they should dramatically help improve the smoothness of your walkthrough tool. Alex, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, I wanted to make a note that we did work a bit on the algorithm that blends keyframes. So there should be some improvement as well in X13. Another tip I like to give is use fewer keyframes. If there's any possible way for you to use less keyframes and get a similar result, that's going to tend to give you a smoother video.
One more question. When I save this walkthrough, I use normally Macintosh, Apple Macintosh. So the format in which I save, and I used to send it by WhatsApp to my clients sometimes. And they usually use that Android phones. And that video is not playable on the Android phones. So what you suggest on that, how it can be a universally playable video on multiple formats?
Yeah, I think the default video that a lot of the Macs generate is a .movie file, .mov file. You can adjust that. And using on the Mac, what I typically use is just their built-in iMovie application. Then you could export that to, one that's pretty universally available is the MP4 format. And that way, if you're sending it to somebody on Android, it should easily be playable on a device like that.
But it is a hassle. First, you have to save, make the video, then to convert it, and then sometimes it is not readable. So I will suggest that if in your new version, it is right there that one can save in the required format, and it is readable on the WhatsApp, because this is the most used format nowadays in everywhere, WhatsApp. Thank you.
Fair enough. Thanks for your question today, Sal.
We have a question from Vicky Worcester. Go ahead and ask your question, Vicky.
Hi, are you able to hear me?
Hey, Vicky.
Hey, I have two questions. One is on the video that you just showed that's on the preview screen now. Your cameras are set a distance apart, yet when you play the video, it looks like someone's almost standing still and pivoting around. How did you accomplish that?
Okay, so if you look as I scroll through this example in here, Vicky, let's zoom out here a little bit. Let's go into that actual path and let's take a look at it. So you can see that I actually have 6 keyframes in here. And what's going to happen is each one of those keyframes, if we just kind of toggle in here and we look at keyframe number 1 that begins at the door, what's going to happen in this particular case, if we kind of scroll back to this preview on keyframe number 1, this path is going to follow, this video will follow that path, and then what's happening here is each keyframe is telling it how fast to go, what angle to generate, and what tilt and height for the camera. And then as we kind of go through each one of these keyframes, if you notice keyframe number 1, the speed and the angle and the height, and then we skip ahead to the next keyframe here. Let's just go to keyframe number 2, and we jump. It's going to change a little bit, and what happens is in between the two, as you go between, it will blend that height and those angles to generate this path. And as we just kind of scroll through it and go to the next keyframe, we get to keyframe number 3 here, then it's able to generate that, and the path is recording it along those settings for each of those keyframes.
Okay, cool. And my other question is, how would you set up a walkthrough for a dollhouse view?
Okay, so we have an example of one of those on the website, right? And what you can do there is when we click the define button, so right now I'm on walkthrough path number 4 that's going through the center of the house. If I click the define button and we come over here and we look on this panel, and I'm actually going to go to the camera panel down here. Down at the bottom, it's using a layer set that I've defined, and currently it's just the default called 3D camera view. And if you come over and we just drop this down, I actually have a camera view set that's called the 3D view dollhouse. And if we just kind of take a look at what that means, when you look at this, for example, let's just go in and look at the roof. All of the roof settings, in particular the roof planes, are turned off. So that way, if I build a walkthrough path and it's very high above the house, you'll be looking down, you won't see the roof on. And if I think we've got an example of that out on the website here, let me just bring that over here. Let's see if we can open that real quickly. And let's go over to our user center and look at our samples gallery. Okay, yeah, here we go.
Brilliant.
So you see how it's diving in there, Vicki?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so what's happened here is I paused that. Again, we're using the layer set that has those layers turned off. Notice that I don't have any terrain out behind the swimming pool. Again, that's because my layer set has turned off the terrain. So that layer set can be used when you're generating your walkthrough. And as I just kind of back up just a little bit and click play, you can see how we can use that layer set to generate just the exact view you want. In this case, one of our content developers generated it. It's fast, it's slow, and then when you get inside, we change the layer set. This is a different walkthrough path, and then we've kind of moved those and put them together. Again, using what I typically recommend is if you're going to do a whole house walkthrough, is you can patch those together using either on the Mac iMovie or on the PC the Microsoft Video Editor, or there's a lot of other video editors, and you can just take all those paths and put them together. If you take a look back here, if I cancel out of this, I actually have 5 or so walkthrough paths as we zoom out. I've got a couple in the front and then a couple in the back. All those walkthrough paths obviously take a little bit of time to generate, but I'll patch those all together in a separate video editing program that's really optimized for that. I know some of the people ask questions, how do you put music to it? And both of those apps that run on Macs and PCs allow you to easily do that. Does that address your question there, Vicki?
Yes. Yes, it does. Thank you very much, Scott.
Okay.
We have a question from Renee Rabbit. Hi, Renee. Go ahead and ask your question.
Scott, how's it going? Always nice to hear from you. Hey, Alex.
Renee.
Not sure if you guys can talk on this yet, but any news about possible implementation of a new rendering engine using the RTX platform?
Well, that's a great subject. And if you come down and you take a look at what we've got coming up with our live home design seminars, that is a specific topic that we're going to address a little bit later in the month. If I scroll down here, 3D rendering and what's coming next. And we've put a lot of work into this, and I think you're going to be pretty excited about it. We're going to showcase this Thursday, October 29th. And as it kind of implies, we have completely replaced our rendering engine in the next generation of Chief Architect, and it's looking really good. So we'll be showing that off, Renee, on October 29th.
I'm very excited. Can you say whether or not it's going to be utilizing RTX cards specifically in that real-time
Yeah,
tracing?
I know that the new RTX series have been released. We've seen some pretty impressive test results inside the company that are really exciting. And, you know, I'm going to try and get our developer online to preview that as we have Alex here today and talk about the details of it. So come back on October 29th and we're gonna showcase that.
Awesome, man. I got one more question. Are you guys going to continuously have like Dustin Cruz doing updates to all the core materials? I've been such a big fan.
There's a shout out, Dustin, if you're online.
Yeah.
Thanks for the feedback. And all of our content staff, Dustin, Dan, Bailey, are hard at work putting new things together for the software. We don't just wait for new versions. We're trying to get those in all the time. So hopefully you're seeing improvements as time goes on with those things.
Nice. Very much so. Appreciate it.
Okay. Have a great day. Thanks for chatting in and watching.
Scott, we're going to check back in with Alan Lehman. Go ahead and ask your question, Alan.
All right, thanks for your patience. And thank you guys for doing these workshops. These are really nice extra little feature to the program. My question is regarding the animation of our camera movement. Are you going to look at introducing any sort of curve editing to a keyframe edit for the keyframes, similar to other, you know, a more robust animation program where it'd be able to control and ease in and ease out of keyframes.
Sure. Thanks for the question, Alan. Alex, you want to see about addressing that?
Yeah. Well, am I allowed to say what's not going to be an X13? So that's not going to be an X13. That's something that's come up. I think it's going to be a balance between, how many tools can we add before it becomes, too complicated for what it is in the context that we have in Chief Architect. But I think that's a great suggestion, and I know I personally would enjoy exploring that and seeing what we can do. So I'm going to write that down as a request. Definitely, thanks for that.
Yeah, I used to work in the animation field, and so I think that even just the simplest curve editor for the keyframes could be pretty easily understood by the medium to advanced user to make that transition, because people are used to working in this CAD environment. So I'm hopeful, because whenever I do a walkthrough animation, I'm pretty much operating at single speed because of the breaking speed in the midst, in the middle keyframe really seems to hurt me visually.
Well, I've written it down. I definitely, I think that'd be something that'd be neat to explore in the future.
Great, thanks.
Hey, thanks a lot, Alan, for the question and watching the webinar today.
All right, we have a question from Charles. Hi, Charles. Go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you. Good morning, Scott. Good morning, Alex. Couple of quick questions. During your walkthrough, I think between your first path and your second, you got the front door to open. Could you kind of discuss how you did that, and also maybe touch on going up and down stairs? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Charles. So in the design here, if we kind of zoom in, you're going to notice that I turned my labels on, so you can see that I have walkthrough path 1, walkthrough path 2, and walkthrough path 3. And one of the things that I've done here is we kind of zoom in to walkthrough path 3 in here. What I did between walkthrough path 2 and 3 is I simply clicked on the door, and when you click on the door, of course, in 3D, there's this little option to open and close the door. So before I click the record button for path number 3, I just clicked on that, opened the door, and then clicked record. So when you then merge the two paths together, you can see that it kind of just blends through, and I'm just trying to find that walkthrough path real quick. So you see how that jumped ahead. That's the beginning of walkthrough path 3. It's a little bit harsh. Animations on our list so that we can animate things as you get close to them. We just back up just a little bit. That was the trick in doing that. Before I recorded walkthrough path 3, just simply went into that object, said display it open, and then hit record. Does that make sense, Charles?
Yeah, it does. It makes perfect sense. That's kind of what I thought you did, but I wasn't so sure. And the second part was, if we have time, can you touch on going up and down stairs smoothly?
Yeah, you should be able to draw a walkthrough path and go upstairs and have that automatically follow the stairs. And if we just take in our 3D menu here, come down to walkthrough paths, create a path, and we just kind of click and drag up the stairs. And let's kind of rotate this camera just a little bit as we do that. And then let's go into our preview panel off to the side. I'm going to click from the drop down the new one that I just generated. So that's walkthrough path number 6. Give that just a second. And then as we kind of slide this around, you see how it's going up the stairs? You see that, Charles, in the preview?
Yes. See, the problem I've had is it goes right through the stairs on occasion. I don't know. Maybe it's my program, but
yeah. Well, I think part of it is you want to make sure in your settings for your keyframes here that the camera heights are relative to the floor. And when you have stairs and it's marked relative, then the camera should follow and go up those stairs at that relative height that we have set up, which is, I think, about 60 inches, if I see that correctly.
There you
Scott,
go.
can
That's
I
lovely.
interject real quick?
Yeah, yeah.
We recently turned off a 3D view default setting that's called camera bumps off walls. And I believe that control also is what makes the camera intelligently recognize the stairs to move up and down with the stairs. So Charles, you might check to see if that setting is turned off in your project, and that may have an impact.
Ah, okay, good. Thank you for that one.
Alex, do you anything you want to add to that?
Well, absolute versus relative was the first thing that popped in my head. If there's any potential disconnect between the stairs, other stair sections, or landings, or the floor above, that can also could potentially cause the camera to not be where you'd expect it. But yeah, I think you both answered it well.
Great, thanks, guys. Good
Yep.
presentation.
We've gotten to all the questions. Scott, did you have any other announcements you wanted to make?
Yeah, well, first of all, I wanted to thank everybody for attending today's session. We've started to announce the next version of Chief Architect X13. Today, you got a sneak peek of the 3D walkthroughs and what's coming next. And the entire month of October, we're going to be previewing what's coming next. And as we just kind of come down, when you go to our website, if we back up one and you scroll down here and you come down to this category called live home design webinars and training, then what you can find on this page is our schedule. So tomorrow, Friday, we have a boot camp. If you're new to the program, this is a great resource to learn about the program. Maybe you're not a customer, or maybe you're new to the program. Great webinar to attend, and that's tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific time. Then next week, we're going to be talking about 3D solids and specifically what's coming next in the program. We've done a lot of new editing capabilities with 3D solids. We'll be excited to show these off. With each of these webinars, we're going to show you the basics of how to use the tools today. And then we're going to be previewing things that are coming in the very next version. Following week, we're going to be looking at materials and patterns. And again, what's coming next, that's mid-October, October 15th. And then a little bit later, the week after that, we have 2D elevations and what's coming next, making it easier, specifically really on the interior elevations. If you have open to below rooms or shed walls, then being able to generate those views, we've done a lot of new things with it. And then we were discussing this a little bit earlier. Chief Architect is putting in a new 3D rendering engine. That's at the end of the month, and we're excited to preview that. Each one of these sessions, we're going to try and make the developers available. And then beginning early next month, we do have our virtual training class. These are on sale. You can attend these safely from the convenience of either your office or your home. We have the introductory, intermediate, and kitchen and bath courses, and you can save 20% when you sign up. We appreciate everybody attending, and remember to sign up for next week's session on 3D solids. You'll find that link right down here on the website for signing up. Have a great day. Thanks for attending, and we hope to see you soon.